And we have 3 people in the lobby, so I'm gonna let them in now.
Thank you.
All right. Or should I wait until it's 10:59?
No, it's fine. I'll just warn them that we're going to start in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Welcome, everyone. We're going to begin the webinar in just a few minutes. Hello again, everyone. We're just going to give a few of the late stragglers a minute to join, and then we will start the webinar. Okay, I think we will begin. Welcome, everyone, to this webinar, Is Your School System Data at Risk?, where we will explore how to protect students, parents, and employees from cyber threats. First off, thank you very much for those who are attending today, and also thank you to those who may be viewing this webinar later on asynchronously. We do have a couple of housekeeping items before we start. One of which is this video is being recorded for future presentation, and all the resources, including the link to this video and other resources discussed in the presentation, will be made available to everyone post webinar. The second thing is questions. We will be taking questions via the chat function. If you could present those via chat, we will answer them as they come up. So without further ado, I'd like to, again, thank you all for attending. My name is Steve Henn. I am with Oreos. And joining me today are Jake Perez with Trins Security. And filling in for Don Wisdom from DataLink Networks is Brian Wisdom from DataLink Networks, who assures us we're getting the better end of the deal of the two. So without further ado, Jake, can you give us a little bit of an overview on how things are in the cyber world for schools?
Absolutely. Pleasure, everybody, and good morning. Thank you so much, Steve, as well for that. So right now, we all are seeing incidents on the rise, and it's no quite surprise why this is happening. You know, with the world in transition as it is, we're seeing cyber incidents across all verticals going up. And as this indicator points on our graph here, on our graph, excuse me, school cyber incidences have increased nearly 300% since just 2018-19 school year. So that's equaling out to about 2 cybersecurity incidents per day. This obviously covers the gamut between breaches, losses of information, but some, as you'll see as we get more into the slides, are as serious as ransomware attacks and incidents that cause a disruption of service and learning for the students. So right now, As we illustrate, it's not exactly a matter of when whether it's going to hit, rather, excuse me, but it's when and how at risk your organization is. And that's what we're going to be covering today.
So next slide, a major example of when this happened. And as school districts, you're not alone nationwide. These are happening to many school districts. For example, San Diego School District was hit, and they have over 500,000 students within their entire school district. This attack happened in October of 2018. And how San Diego School District was breached was they had multiple reports of phishing attacks and phishing emails, which were then used to gather login information of staff members throughout the school district. Once the hackers had that information, they were able to log in and encompass social security numbers, first and last names of student and staff, date and birth, mailing address, home address, and phone numbers. And once all this information was encompassed, the district was in major trouble, and that's going to lead to more discussion within this presentation of ways to counteract that moving forward.
So why are incidents increasing? You know, it's no surprise right now that with distance learning, remote learning on the rise, and the necessity at this moment because of everything going on with the pandemic, as well as other natural disasters, especially out here on the West Coast. You know, faculty, the institutions themselves, they're facing not only a increasing need to springboard into the cloud, into distance and educational learning, whereby they may have been on a path to get there with a roadmap, but now it's a necessity to do it in immediately very short term. And of course, whenever we rush, things get lapsed. And one of the things that we see being put to the side for the interest of just getting students registered, getting students into classrooms is security. And also, we are failing to recognize that because now the students are not in an environment that has been created simply for learning, for their benefit, they're now at the home. So they're sharing these spaces with parents, with non-working parents and professional parents. They're doing work. They're still having their normal interactions in the household environment, and now the school is becoming a natural extension into that location. So security issues, data loss, information loss is flowing not only north-south from the student to the school and from the school to the distance learning location, but it has a chance to get compromised within the household itself. And these are highly targeted areas. The cyber criminals recognize now more than ever that students at home are extremely vulnerable, and they recognize that it's a pathway back to a school district or to a school office through one of these students' homes. If we go to 6, you're going to see that the makeup of cyber incidences are across the board. A lot of it is breach and unauthorized disclosure, but a surprising and shocking amount is ransomware. Almost a quarter of incidences are ones where there has been successful infiltration of ransomware. And primarily, these are coming in through phishing campaigns. Students are vulnerable targets. They don't recognize that an email coming through purporting to be from a teacher actually is not. They're not skilled or adept at that. So safeguards need to be put in place by the school and the institution themselves to protect not only them, but the students as well. So getting to my point, we need to start thinking about moving the security perimeter from the institution itself and extending that out to each student as best and as efficiently as possible. Ransomware and malware is definitely a very scary proposition. We're going to have some slides in the not too distant future here that's going to illustrate just how far these threat actors can take such an event and how much they can actually gain from this financially. But neither is it to be discounted breaches. These are student records and information, and depending on the type of information that they get from this can cover the gamut from simply age, date of birth, address, which is enough for them to latch on and do identity theft off of, to sometimes Social Security or applications to higher educational learning institutions, which have financial information in there. So even though it generically states breaches or unauthorized disclosures, that covers a myriad of information that is being leaked out, and depending on which one, could have devastating effect for the students in their future. So just a simple quote here. In 2019, most publicly disclosed data breaches were caused by parties that are known to and already part of the school community. What this means is third party is still a risk factor for education, especially now more than ever. We saw the trouble with Zoom in the beginning with higher education until they really doubled down and looked at their processes. We're rapidly implementing solutions that were built and designed for enterprise corporations that have for themselves already procedures and standards in place to bring in new technology. But what we see is that's being used to backfill and get students into a classroom. Not exactly the same intention. And that's why having professionals with a game plan already in place to help you is going to become pivotal.
So Jay, that's a great point. One of the things that strikes me when I hear that again is that, you know, part of the family, so to speak, is where the vulnerability is. And when we talk about being part of the family, the one of the key things that we have found in terms of data breaches is the vulnerability that presents itself in the vendor community. And when I say the word vendor, I mean it extraordinarily broadly, in the sense that, you know, even within sort of the old normal of in-class attendees, there were a tremendous amount of volunteers that would come on into school systems to help at the front desk, to get involved in other ways within the school community. Every time you have an access point to the school information, that is a risk. So looking to contain those vulnerabilities is an extraordinarily important part of the security posture. We'll also find out later on, but training your staff on your vendors are important. Letting the individuals who are working within the system know who is part of the community, who is a legitimate vendor or a legitimate part of the community, and part of the education process around that is incredibly important, especially with regard to protecting against phishing attacks. So, you know, one of the things that's important to focus on here is that training with regard to vendors is very, very important to a school system because of the dynamic nature of the environment. And one of the things, you know, again, to further bring it up, you know, the school system is a number of individuals who go in and out of the community because they go through the system. So if you're looking at a high school, roughly 4 years, every 4 years, you're going to have 100% turnover in the student body, as well as volunteers and others necessarily associated with it. That is a tremendous vulnerability. So training, making sure that everyone involved in the community is up on the current security posture within the organization and understand the parameters is critical to a mature security posture. So one of the things that we've worked on to help the school systems, and this will be available to everyone post webinar, is that we have a vendor evaluation sheet that just has 20 questions to help get everyone started. We focus on 5 critical areas: your information management, your information security management systems, compliance and accountability, how your service levels are and DR profile is. It looks at your talent and resources, and finally your control. 12 simple questions to get you a rough understanding on how your posture is and where you stand in terms of gaps to achieve a full information security readiness. So, Brian, can you take us through this slide? What can you tell us about the cost of a data breach?
Definitely, Steve. So we talked a little bit today so far about how ransomware attacks happen and who they happen to, and we haven't really talked about the consequences yet, and this is what we'll get into next. Some of the largest ransomware attacks have cost $600,000, $2.9 million, and even $3.7 million, the largest reported loss in Kentucky that Jake will comment in next. But as we know, school system budgets are tight, and I'm sure as IT directors, superintendents, anyone on the IT staff, you want to spend those dollars to directly improve learning and impact your students on an ongoing basis. Imagine having to cover the unforeseen costs, because ransomware attack is never budgeted and it's always unforeseen, to a data breach investigation and mitigation for those attacks, or even how much it costs to shut down the school, either remote or in person, due to the lack of any type of system equipment or system access. And that's exactly what school systems are having to think about across the United States, and they've had to do as of yet to date. Prevention will cost less than an incident itself. And for a small portion of those costs, of the costs that potentially can be in the ransomware attacks, you're going to be in a much better position if you avoid those kind of issues. The problem is some senior school leadership really don't understand how and where they are vulnerable. So the key things to understand on this slide is reviewing your security posture and understanding where your weaknesses are before the attacks do happen. Where are your biggest risks? Where do you want to spend your money to protect yourselves from those risks? And there are very cost-effective solutions out there to run these type of scans, this type of analysis, to give you that information that you need to prevent these attacks moving forward. So I'll pass it over to you, Jake, to talk about an example in Kentucky.
Thank you, Brian. So like you mentioned, we tend to think that a massive loss like $3.7 million, which was the ransom, paid out in Kentucky during one of these incidences, is something that takes the work of like sophisticated backdoor hacking and massive penetrations and recon of a system. It didn't in this case. It was a simple phishing campaign. They went out looking for soft targets, sent fraudulent emails just disguised as a vendor invoice, something along the lines of 3.7 mil for whatever that may be. So what that ended up entailing was they got in the middle. It's a man in the middle attack. They positioned themselves as that vendor, got somebody from the school district to believe them that they were the source that needed the funds, and it was wired to them. And once that went through, that's it. Obviously, the threat actor disappeared into the wild, and they didn't catch it until the bill came up due, and the actual vendor came calling and stated, "Where's our money?" So that was weeks, if not a little bit over a month later. And at that point, it's very difficult to recover and to pivot from that, but the damage is already done. Now, like Brian was mentioning, an ounce of prevention here, security training and awareness, controls, proper access, having these measures in place that are just as easy to implement as these threat actors easily implement their procedures to try and gain these illicit funds, is to counteract to these types of events. So what we propose and what you'll see moving forward as we continue the presentation is our framework for how we can help you avoid this type of incident.
So, again, taking a look at what the risks mean for the school system stakeholders, right? I say this often, right? The only thing worse than losing data is losing the kids' data. No one will get more excised about items than finding out that their children's profile has been hacked, their children's PII has been taken, and then they're vulnerable as they age. Because make no mistake, the capture of this data for someone who's 12, individuals know exactly what they're doing, and they're just waiting for the opportune time to use that data in the future. So, we outlined a few things here about the risks, right? Not only is a hack about to happen, but you're going to start finding out as systems and leaders, if you haven't already, there's going to be pressure from parents and staff because people are looking at it. One of the actually dirty little secrets is the vast majority of school system hacks go unreported. We had an incident in Connecticut here where a local school district was hacked for ransomware. I guess generally not 3.7 million, a modest amount, $15,000. They did not report it to the FBI. They decided to pay the ransomware on their own. They paid it. 3 months later, the same hackers hacked them again for even more money. So at that point, they realized they needed to report it to the FBI and did so. But they thought they could pay off a hacker and be done with it. It's not going to happen. It just simply isn't going to happen. Burying your head in the sand, hoping it'll go away is not going to be a solution to the problem. Community reputation is at stake, right? Again, back to the our children are one of the most vulnerable parts of our population. You want to protect them, and the idea of protection needs to be a little bit more holistic. It's not just the mind in school, the body in sports, but it's their reputation and their data security needs to be protected as well. We talked already about vendor security practices. 80%, this is not just for school systems, but 80% of cybersecurity vulnerability are actually internal vulnerabilities, not external. Jake mentioned earlier, we have this vision of a whole bunch of guys in black hats and some bird in some Eastern European hole someplace hacking away at banging away at firewalls. That's really not how the vast majority of cyber incidents occur. So making sure that the training is adequate and thorough, and analyzing your security practices with your vendors are quite important. Managing the cost of a data breach. Again, as was mentioned before, the cost of prevention is far, far, far less than the cost of a breach. And then finally, one of the things that's going to start to come up is how much of a rigorous process or program do you have in your information security. Look, most people are generally aware of it, and let's be honest, right? The security isn't top of mind for school systems because they're focused on educating the children. But like anything else, it has unfortunately become part of the reality of life that you have to manage it. And then, but to manage it, to help you manage it, you should focus on some level of best practices to guide you through it. Even if you're not certified or have some external third party verify it, the idea of going after a best practices framework is critically important. So how do you begin to protect your organization and students? Well, we use a term called security maturity. And there's obviously some steps to get there, and we're going to go through these steps in a little bit more detail to help you understand it. But first of all, as I said, this isn't something that has to be, that it can be casual. You need to think about security like you think about locking your car when you go to the mall. When you walk away, you hit the button on your key fob and it clicks. You don't even think about it. You generally don't think about locking your doors at night. It needs to become part of the muscle memory of the organization. So comprehensive, up-to-date security policies and making sure that the training is done is very, very important. Part of that is a thorough understanding of your assets and risks. When we talk about assets, what we're talking about are the items that contain data that may be vulnerable to a breach or valuable to someone if they went and steal it. So obviously the network computers, you have software, you have human assets, et cetera, and understanding the risk profile of all that is incredibly important. Security maturity involves a triage and understanding of how big are your risks and attacking the major ones first. cybersecurity does have a sort of an 80-20 rule to it. The vast majority of your vulnerability is in a very, very narrow band. Attack those first, and you're going to be able to get on a very sound and secure footing. But after you identify it, you want to create an action plan. So it's not just a matter of we're going to be one and done here. It is not a switch. It's a dial. It's a path. It's a journey through this process. So getting a hold of your major risks, and then identifying the other vulnerabilities and constantly addressing those as you go into the future is incredibly important. I mentioned before compliance with a standard or framework. This is part of the best practices approach. There are many out there. The international framework of ISO 27001, very comprehensive, very robust. You can get certified as a validation to your community, your communities and your other stakeholders. Domestically, NIST CSF is a recognized cybersecurity framework from the government. Any of those, as well as a few others, would help you on the path of security maturity. And then finally, cyber insurance. Go and purchase cyber insurance, obviously, if you have not had it. Now, the first 4 elements that we just described will help reduce your cyber insurance cost, because insurance companies are now looking at, well, what is your security posture? Do you have up-to-date policies? Do you understand your risks and your assets? Do you have a plan in place? And is that plan to a recognized standard? The more you can show you're compliant with this path, the less your premiums will be for your cyber insurance. So we can take a little bit more detail on each one of those. Jake, do you want to take us through the security policies?
Yeah, no, this is a checklist that we're going to be sending out to you guys. So what I want to do is go over overview of a few of the key points on this. Now, this is a 12-step list that we've created to just serve as a guide and a benchmark for how you need to take a look at your security overall. And you'll notice here on this little screenshot of it that it also includes things like physical security. We took the time to be comprehensive in terms of, we're not just looking at this from a technological standpoint. While it's true right now, distance learning or remote learning are the biggest vulnerability points at the moment, physical security, locking doors, securing securing student records are still absolutely important. And the reason I slipped and said patients was because in your school systems, a lot of times there is a school nurse, and the records that they keep actually do fall under HIPAA guidelines. So like Steve was mentioning a moment ago, it's compliance and regulations set forth and mandated by the government, but it's not only just to achieve accreditation to get your financial funding from the government, but it could be something along the lines of healthcare or other ancillary compliances that you need to think of as well. And we'll send this out to you guys after the presentation.
So one of the things mentioned earlier is policy libraries, right? So any comprehensive information security program will have a range of policies to deal with the organization's security posture. Start with a good foundation, right? And then customize. There are plenty of policies out there on the web. We're partial. We have Oreos provides or sells an information security management system called OnTrack, which comes with a full set of ISO and NIST compliant policies. The trick with cybersecurity, like anything that seems extremely complicated and extremely onerous, is you need to take it step by step, one step at a time, and every step takes you closer and closer to security maturity and the ability to prevent cyber incidences from taking their toll on your organization. But comprehensive libraries simply means policies that address the needs of your organization. And part of that is identifying assets and evaluating risk, which we're talking about on the next slide. So as I mentioned before, when we talk about an asset, we're talking about an asset that has data that could be vulnerable to hacking, right? There are a lot of assets within a school system, within the physical plant of the school, that are assets and need to be tracked, but don't necessarily contain personally identifiable information. So from a cybersecurity perspective, focusing on those systems, software, grading systems. Jake mentioned the school's health records of the students, identifying where there is personally identifiable information, either within a system or on computers, is incredibly important. Where is it stored? I can tell you I could tell you all sorts of war stories about how little organizations really do understand where PII is, mostly because a lot of PII is transferred within email, and then someone will download a spreadsheet with student IDs or social security numbers or other addressable information and forget that file is there. So understanding where there is potential vulnerability is incredibly important. And then evaluating risks. Risk assessment is actually a relatively simple and straightforward process. What you're involving is effectively three areas. You're looking at the confidentiality level. How confidential is the information, right? You're looking at the integrity of the system, in the sense that how vulnerable is it to potentially being hacked or going down or being taken offline. And then availability. And availability is the question of, if you were to lose the system, say, for example, you are locked out of your grading system or your student management system, how long could you go without having access to that information? Each one of those elements provides, in concert, provides a risk profile of each of the assets that you can start to evaluate and say, hey, look, this, clearly the principal's computer is going to be a little bit more critical in the information security posture than say the librarians, but you may be surprised. Moving forward, understanding, identifying, quantifying those risks is important to maintain a mature information security posture. So, Brian, can you talk us through a little bit of an action plan for treating the risks?
Definitely. So, looking into going back to Steve and Jake's point, look at creating a security policy and putting in the mitigation factors. It's overwhelming, and for school districts that have the staff of maybe one or two IT officials and superintendents that are dealing with everything, it's very time consuming, and essentially you don't have enough time. So what normally happens is, and here at Data Link Networks, we work with a lot of IT directors and superintendents for school districts nationwide. We hear their complacency, and we'll get to it when we get to it. And that answer is not good enough, and it creates a lot of vulnerabilities and problems. And the main point and takeaway here is you need to do something. It doesn't happen overnight, but you need to start the process and take it one step at a time, to Jake and Steve's point. The wrong thing to do is not think that it can happen to you, and that's the thought and mindset that a lot of districts, until it happens, take on. For example, we worked with a school district and the FBI to clean up a ransomware attack that they were hit with. And it was a bad actor getting access to a consultant's password, was able to weave their way into the school's network, and then inevitably had control over the entire email system of high officials within the school district. And they had some pretty sensitive information that they were threatening to release to the open public that could cause major damage. So with that being said, that's just one of many examples that are out there that it can happen to you. It can happen to anybody, no matter the size of a school district. If you're 1,000 students, if you're 100,000 students, you have to think, what can I do, and create those steps in place. And I'll pass it over to Jake to start that process and exactly kind of what step one is.
Yep. We're going to talk real quickly, about the CCPA. That's the one that I wanted to focus in on. This is one that pertains not only to businesses that operate or have headquarters in California, but anybody who does business with any resident of California. And that's a Consumer Privacy Act. And what this entails is just any organization that gathers the information of California residents need to get into compliance. And yes, it does cross over into education. So this is one of those instances, like I mentioned HIPAA earlier, where a broader reaching compliance or regulation that was mandated by the government that one would think would have no bearing on schools actually does come into play. And this is what we're trying to achieve here right now, a framework for education that can be put into effect and practice. So that way we cover all the bases.
You know, if we could go, yeah, if I could jump in real quick on the federal regulations. The next slide, please, if you would. So one of the things that it came up was this, the notion of HIPAA and healthcare records. You know, what we're seeing now with the feds, and given the movements or the prevalence of hacking in K through 12 right now, is that there seems to be a thought within the federal regulators that they're going to start to treat school systems containing student data very much like healthcare with healthcare information, EPHI. And by that I mean we have FERPA right now, but FERPA is really a restriction on or a guidance on how to disclose information rather than necessarily a combination of how to protect versus how to disclose. And we see a much more comprehensive federal regime of regulations to work to provide guidance to school systems to protect the student data. I know, Brian or Jake, if you want to follow up on
Steve's point, we're also looking at COPA, which is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Rule. And this is centered around the collection of personal identifiable information for anyone under the age of 13. So more rules and more regulations are getting added almost on the daily. And they get centered around broader reaching targets, but a lot of times education institutions fall under these requirements as well, but they may just not know it. So Steve raises good points. The awareness of this is something that is coming to light now, and lawmakers are taking note of this, not only because threat actors are targeting schools more and more often, but also students themselves are getting more prevalent and adept at handling and misusing technology. If you remember about a month ago, Twitter got a few prominent accounts like Barack Obama, Elon Musk's account got taken over and used to funnel cryptocurrency to a threat actor. Well, that threat actor turned out to be an underage teenage boy, just bored at school and figured out a loophole in Twitter's backdoor system. And from third period English, he was able to institute this massive hack, not necessarily for financial gain. He just wanted the recognition from it. So threats are coming not only from the outside, but also from the inside. And these laws are trying to be put in place to cordon them off as much as possible.
Well, I hope that young man uses his superpowers for good eventually. But, one of the other things to wrap up this slide is cybersecurity, information security is a very hot topic right now across the industries, across all industries, not just K through 12. Our advice is start early because it's like climbing a mountain. The earlier you start, the more gradual the slope will be, the easier it'll be, the less costly it'll be for you. Every small step does help. So prior to the feds putting this down on paper and forcing you to do it, it would be very much behoove you to get a lot of the early work done. So Jay, can you talk a little bit about cyber insurance?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Steve was mentioning earlier, it is more than just a a want, it should be a need, but it comes at a cost. Simply having it will not give you immediate access to the funds if you have a breach. Insurance companies, like insurance in the automotive or in the home sector, want to see that due diligence was taken prior to an incident before they start allocating funds after an incident. So while it's popular right now, and for a good reason, it does fill a very specific need. It's not a parachute so much as it is just an augment to an already established security framework. So it's part of our recommendation package, but as you can see, we've tied it on to the end because that's truly where it should be, the last resort.
So we're nearing the end here. What we would suggest in terms of next steps for a school system interested in understanding where they are in terms of their information security and cybersecurity programs. Please reach out to us. Obviously, we're very interested in helping you out. We would suggest evaluating your schools, your campus and schools technical environment, doing data assessment, data mapping, understanding your network environment, provisioning access. The parents who had provision, were provisioned in the past, but students graduated, are they still provisioned? You should create a security profile. By that, what that really means is understanding, again, what your assets are, what your vulnerabilities may be within the organization. With that, you can determine our overall risk score. And not only do you determine your overall risk score, but within all the sub-elements, where can you be? And it's a very important to baseline, because these sorts of things you'll show improvement, and with a baseline score, you'll be able to show the progress in quantifiable measures. All this can be done and review the results in less than 30 days with a typical system. And then from there, you can develop an action plan. That action plan doesn't necessarily mean going through a full ISO 27001 audit or becoming fully NIST CSF compliant. But what it should do is at least get you to understand your major vulnerabilities, your major risks, and have a plan to address those in a reasonable time frame with the resources available to the school. And look, we all get it. This is a crazy environment right now. The last thing you need on your plate is another thing to take a look at in terms of for example, a security profile. But it's incredibly necessary right now. With the vulnerabilities and the data access points, you're more exposed than ever before. And so to round out a little bit, one of the things I will mention is I said earlier on about a platform. Much like you wouldn't consider running your finances in your school without an accounting system, you really need to take a look at a information security management system. We're partial to OnTrack because we do it, but there are others out there. And what it does allow you to do is to provide a platform to create, manage, analyze, and monitor your system. And most importantly, what it does is it's going to conserve resources, both time, money, and hours in the day, to help you manage it more effectively. So to wrap this up, then I'm going to open it up for any potential additional questions or comments from our panel. We will provide everyone with some of the resources that we talked about here, the articles, the websites, the presentation. You'll get a copy of the webinar video, and we'll be able to provide you with the infographics as well post webinar. I'm going to open it up to my fellow panelists. Is there any parting words of wisdom that you would like to share with our audience?
I will say this, and this is Brian from Data Link Networks. It's as I mentioned before, it's an overwhelming task to take care of the entire school district and then think about all the security vulnerabilities that are occurring and that are ever changing. And these hackers are getting really, really good about changing their tactics. So having a consultant, having an expert reaching out to those that are dedicated day in, day out to protecting environments and school and networks, I think is very, very vital, because one, it'll lessen the load for you and your staff, and secondarily, you then have a built-in expertise system that can give you insight and good information on a daily basis. So think about that, and we're here to help in any way that you potentially may need.
And just to key off of both of that, I think my colleagues summed it up quite well, and we simply look forward to working with you guys.
We do have there are a couple, we do have a question coming in. The question is, which organizations normally drive this process in a school district, i.e. IT, compliance department, audit, and others? The answer is yes. Doug, I think the answer is normally it is driven by IT, because what we've seen in terms of compliance or internal audit, especially in large school systems, is they tend to be focused on other things. So what I would suggest is the determination tends to come from IT rather than compliance or audit, though we've seen obviously all of them. That being said, I think your question is very perceptive. It does involve cooperation and coordination between every one of those elements. And of course, it goes without saying that buy-in from the top of the organization also happens. So whether it starts from IT, whether it starts from compliance, audit, internal or other, at some point you're going to involve a cross-section of the organization when it comes to information security. It's part of like many things, we're going to have to cooperate and work this together. But the answer is right now about 80%, 85% starts at IT, because that's where the information assets tend to reside.
And I'll add to that, Steve, is coming from the IT department, you handle the firewalls, you handle the security, the email protection, you handle really all the products, but it has to be shown to management, because management obviously is going to sign the check, where they have to have that buy-in, and you have to showcase the analysis of why their school district's at risk. So being able to communicate with all departments, and being able to, I see IT as the facilitator in these discussions, being able to get that buy-in from the top, as Steve mentioned, with data and with analysis and with tools, will really make that conversation more ever-flowing and have the ability to really be in sync with all departments, so it moves in a positive direction. Because if you have one trying to communicate that this is so important and this is a necessary need, while the other doesn't care, then you're going to have dissonance between the districts. So to Steve's point, yeah, you definitely need buy-in from all departments.
You have another obvious question, cost. So, obviously there's ranges of school district size, right? There's what, a million students in the New York City school district. We talked about San Diego with 500,000. I want to say that the average school district, though, in the country is something like 3,500 kids. But to answer the question, generally, the cost is going to be less than $1 per student per month. And I know that's a very rough rule of thumb. That cost will go down on a per student basis the larger the school district. It'll go potentially slightly up the smaller the school district. But when you're looking at a cost less than $1 per student per month. So there's your rough rule of thumb. And then the other question is timing, I think. And I'm anxious to get Jake and Brian's thought on this, but we talked about a 30-day quick little assessment and then a plan. I think a good expectation in terms of starting to get the information security program up and running to start this is between 90 and 180 days, depending on the organization size. You'll see the effect immediately, nearly immediately. But the fact of the matter is starting to get the process to be fully to be fully absorbed within the organization need to expect between 3 to 6 months. Obviously, that can be shorter or longer depending on a number of different factors. Jake and Brian, I don't know if you want to comment on timing.
I'll tangent off of that. First off on the cost, we definitely want to drive the point home that the cost associated with taking action right now, preventative action, far outweighs any breaches. That is undeniable. Our goal is to try and harden schools to make them not the soft target that they are, so that threat actors will look elsewhere before they try and attack, our children for all intents and purposes. Given that, with the framework and the expertise that we have combined between our organizations, we've created a pretty robust layout and roadmap to get into compliance, and it's flexible enough to be used for the small school districts all the way up to almost the largest. And we've had success in a myriad of different ranges and size, and public, higher education, secondary, K through 12, etc. So what we're doing is bringing and baking in flexibility and a standardization into this plan that's going to, like Steve just mentioned, help you see immediate effects. Yes, we will begin to look into your organization and your specific needs to tailor this to fit you, because there is no one-stop solution in security. However, the framework will hold true and you'll begin to see results quickly.
Are there any other questions amongst the audience? Jake, Brian, I'll give you guys the final word before I wrap up.
We want to thank everybody for coming, and we look forward to helping you guys. That's what I have to say. Thank you all so much.
Same, appreciate it. Thank you guys.
Yeah, and again, everyone, thank you very much. And as Jake said, do not hesitate to reach out to us with questions. More than happy to help out.